Hi, Nick. Good to see you as always. Thanks for making the time. So you've got some brand new numbers out. Can you kind of give us a lay of the land of where things stand?
Well, you know, it's interesting, Vashi, two things. First, the ballot numbers and then the preferred prime minister numbers. Not a lot of change in the ballot numbers. Still a 4-point advantage for the Liberals. That's what they've had for the last number of weeks in tracking. However, the really big news has to do with who Canadians would prefer as prime minister. What we've seen is a surge in favor of Mark Carney over the last while. He now has a whopping 29-point advantage over Pierre Poilievre when it comes to who Canadians would prefer as prime minister.
So give us some historical context, if you could, for those numbers in particular, Nick. Like, when's the last time you saw the positive favorabilities for a prime minister at that level?
Actually, Vashi, the last time we saw a gap like this, January 2025, it was a year ago almost, except Justin Trudeau was the prime minister, and he was 27 points behind Pierre Poilievre. So talk about a reversal of fortune. Think of it this way. A year ago, Pierre Poilievre had a massive advantage when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, the Liberal leader, was on the ropes. Now it's almost like political trading places. Pierre Poilievre finds himself trailing Mark Carney, the Liberal leader, by 29 points.
And is it safe to say that the additional jump for Mark Carney, for the Prime Minister, is likely due to the speech in Davos and the reaction to it and kind of like the news cycle around that, do you think?
Yeah, that was basically the big news. And I think it was the combination of not just Mark Carney's speech, but Donald Trump's response to the speech. Because, you know, in the other thing that's noticeable in the tracking over the last week is that worry and concern about Donald Trump and U.S. trade has also spiked in the last week or so. So think of those two things going up. Mark Carney's brand and advantage over Pierre Poilievre on the preferred prime minister tracking, and also Canadians increasingly worried about the impact that Donald Trump might have on the Canadian economy.
How volatile has that number been? The portion of Canadians who would characterize Donald Trump and his actions very, very high on the list of issues that they're worried about? Because I feel like we've talked a lot over the last years. It's been up, it's been down. How volatile, in your view, is that?
Well, it's been in the top two for a year. So you have to think of it that way. Since the last federal election, worry about Donald Trump has either been the top issue or the second issue without exception. So what happens is that when Donald Trump puts new tariffs on Canadian goods, when he says something about Canada being the 51st state, you know, anxiety, concern, worry about Donald Trump in the United States skyrockets. So what we've seen in the last week in Donald Trump's comments related to Prime Minister Mark Carney and what he said at Davos and Donald Trump's displeasure has basically pushed up, why don't we say, the Trump anxiety meter among Canadians. But we have a statistical tie right now, Vashi, between worry about Trump and worry about jobs, but worry about Trump up in the last week.
What are the implications for that? We've talked about the government, the prime minister, but for the leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, and the Conservatives, who, as you point out, from a party perspective, remain not too far away from the Liberals. He just came off a leadership review where he got a huge portion of the vote, over 87%. Like, what are the implications of what you just laid out for him and his party?
Well, the good news for the Conservatives is that they're still only 4 points back of the Liberals, right? Even with a very popular Liberal prime minister
these days.
You know, the bad news is that, you know, Pierre Poilievre significantly trails. We're going to have to wait to see for another week or so to see whether there's any positive kind of impact of the Conservative convention in Calgary and whether that event helps Pierre Poilievre close the gap. It's too early to tell right on that front. But, you know, for the Conservatives, they got to worry about trailing by 29, having their leader trail by 29 points.
I interviewed the campaign manager last night who has, it seemed clear to me, internalized the kind of data that you're presenting and talked about on a number of different fronts, sort of, you know, projecting a different tone. And in particular, we've seen evidence of that in some aspects of the House of Commons, right? Ushering through a bill faster, asking the Prime Minister to meet. That seems like a very, you know, deliberate decision to change strategy on some fronts. Does it make sense to you?
Well, I think it makes sense. I don't think there's a downside for Pierre Poilievre to kind of moderate himself in terms of his tone, not his core message, but in terms of his tone. However, what's clear from the polling data is that if Pierre Poilievre wants to be competitive with Mark Carney, He has to have a vision for how we would manage the bilateral relationship with the United States. He has to have a vision on how we would negotiate a free trade agreement. And he has to have a vision on where jobs are going to come from. And, you know, the thing is, to say that it's similar is just, it doesn't help the Conservatives close the gap. And that's the vulnerability right now. U.S.-Canada relations. The Conservatives need to assert an alternative vision, a different viewpoint, a different way that they want to manage the binational relationship, or else their leader is just going to be stuck, mired, because Canadians, when they're looking at the Prime Minister, who they're thinking about Prime Minister, they're thinking about who do they want to deal with Donald Trump. And right now it seems that Mark Carney has the advantage.
Scientist and founder of Nanos Research. I also asked him about several potential by-elections coming up. The Liberals today poached the deputy leader of Ontario's NDP to run in the riding last held by Bill Blair, with Nate Erskine-Smith just announcing he's going to run for that vacant provincial seat, but still sit in the federal caucus. And the Carney government has recruited family physician, or the Liberals rather, have family physician Dr. Danielle Martin to run in the riding last held by Chrystia Freeland. Here's what Nick Nanos had to say about whether or not these seats are safe for the Liberals.
Well, actually, in this particular environment where people are worried about jobs and the economy, I don't think there's any seat that's 100% safe. And, you know, the thing is that even if you're a Liberal voter in some of these by-elections, you know that if the Liberals don't win the by-election, that Mark Carney will still be Prime Minister. I think the Liberals have to worry about the Conservatives being well-organized, going into these ridings and say, send a message to Mark Carney. Send a message to Mark Carney that you want him to move faster. Send a message that you want to see results. Because Mark Carney will still be Prime Minister, likely, after these by-elections, but that the Conservatives try to make it a referendum, not on Carney, but on the fact that he's not been able to move as fast as a lot of Canadians would want him to move.